Hello there, and welcome to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin, and I am the host. With me today is Michael Andrews. Michael Andrew is a content architect and metadata specialist. Presently, he is working for Content Science. He is focused on helping enterprises transform how they develop and manage content. He has written two books on metadata, and he just reached the 10-year anniversary for his blog, The Story Needle. In the Story Needle or the Story Needle?
It's just called Story Needle. Yes.
Okay, okay. Um, it's a pleasure to have you, Michael.
Well, thank you, Joaquin. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you for having me on your show here. As you said, I've been working with content for a, a long time now, and I've had a particular focus on the architecture of content and the metadata that is used to support content. And I think with the rise of artificial intelligence of different kinds, there's a huge opportunity for us to look at how we work with content in order to better support the goals that we're trying to achieve by using AI. So I'm excited to have a chance to talk about this topic with you today.
Yeah, and today you're reaching out via you're reaching out from Virginia, right?
Yeah, I'm in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay. Um, so your expertise is in headless content management systems, metadata, and modeling domains.
Right,
Modeling knowledge, right? Uh,
exactly.
who should reach out to you?
Well, I'm very interested in just connecting with people who have an interest in this. I mean, I find that there's kind of an enthusiasm out there among people who are interested in this, and I every connection I make, I find over time I learn from them, and hopefully they learn from me. So it's a not a huge community of people who have this particular focus, but it is growing, and it's a great community to be a part of. So if you're not connected with me currently and you think this is something that is of interest to you, I do encourage you to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can provide that those details um, about that. But and I'm happy to share other folks who have similar interests to mine with other people. So
And what kind of challenges do you address in your consulting practice?
yeah, I help often very large organizations which have many different sources of content, and they're trying to reach many different audience groups, different kinds of customers, even different kinds of employees they need to support, partners, all these different segments that they have. And it's it's a very complex challenge to be able to communicate in a coherent way with all these different groups, drawing on so many different sources of content being developed by so many different people. So, my goal really is to try to bring more coherence to this, both coherence in terms of how things are developed and coherence in terms of how you're able to deliver what these different groups need, because they have different needs at different points in time, and you want to get the right content to the people at the right time. Um, a lot of what I help organizations do is define the way they manage this, how they structure it, how they develop what they do, how they create the operations behind the scenes to support all this. And a key driver of this is around uh, metadata, being able to label with some specificity what all these various pieces of communication and pieces of information that the organization is producing, what that represents. And when you have that well labeled, then you're able to do a lot more with it.
Yeah, interesting that you say that metadata is kind of the underlying glue of information for everything that's being produced, despite which kind of media. it takes form in, right?
That's right. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
provide a product or a service from an organization,
Yep.
and it revolves around a particular domain or sets of domains, right?
It does. Yeah. I mean, so we can think about metadata as covering so many different things. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the word domain, which is a very important word because it defines uh, topics and what those topics are about. When we talk about domain metadata, that's what was called descriptive metadata. So we're describing what that content relates to, the topics it relates to. There are also many other kinds of metadata out there. There's technical metadata, so you're defining, say, the formats that media are in. We know that the different kinds of media have different formats to them. There's administrative metadata, things that define like when something was created, or when it's supposed to be expiring, or who created it, or what you're supposed to do with it, who it's for. Those are all examples of administrative metadata. And there's other kinds of metadata out there as well. And when you start looking at the different dimensions of what the content relates to, you get a complete picture of what you can do with that content, how it can be used. And that gives us that sort of these abilities to connect that content with things like tools like AI that can then transform that content into other purposes.
Now you're saying content, and we've mentioned content at least 50 times just in the preamble.
Yes.
But just in a more concrete sense, the content can be applied to marketing, communication,
Yeah.
sales. It could be applied to training, HR,
Yeah.
um, keeping track of reporting, KPIs, and things like that, accounting. It kind of helps to marry all these different functions together, right?
Yeah. I mean, content at this point is really any kind of digital asset that has a communicative purpose to it. So um, it can range everything from, say, social media content, which is obviously very important for organizations to communicate with customers and the public at large, all the way back to things that are used entirely internally to, the labels in, internal enterprises systems that your dashboards or something that employees are looking at have content on them. Um, and so it covers a very wide range of things. But what we find more and more, since everything is done online now, all organizations are delivering their services online. We need to be able to combine things in different ways. And so you don't really know what things you can need to connect together. And as a consequence, we have to have this ability to connect them together. And that's what our metadata allows us to do.
So the main focus of this conversation today is going to be on metadata as an enabler, as a means for building a foundation for knowledge graphs and LLMs and chatbots and all these other types of applications, where you can sort of have a dynamic interaction with your content in a more meaningful way, right?
Right,
Or
right.
is are there any other applications of metadata that tie into artificial intelligence that you think would be relevant to the conversation?
Well, I think you've touched on some of the major ones. There Metadata can support knowledge graphs, which are really a way to query um, a series of connected information. And so the metadata helps define what all these pieces of information are about and allows you to do a connected query to show relationships between different information. You've mentioned LLMs, which is the foundation for generative AI, and metadata can help us to create much more targeted, I'd say, generative AI. And then I think probably the other area that the metadata can help us as it relates to content is more and more on the machine learning side. Um, the metadata is really about labeling the data sets that are used in machine learning to help predict things. And so in content particularly, machine learning has a valuable role for recommendations and personalization and things like that.
Would you terribly mind just going a little deeper into LLMs as defining, large language models or language models,
Mhm.
and then specifying, what determines it to be a large model or a small model?
Yeah. So how I think about LLMs is that they are um, basically based on a vast crawl of diverse content that covers. Um, People do say a massive web crawl, and then they look at all this content, and they start to um, look at specifically we'll focus here on text LLMs. I mean, there's image LLMs and a whole other other kinds of large models. They're all tend to be called large language models, but we look specifically at the text. We start seeing that the text itself um, has certain patterns of regularity in terms of what words appear in sequences together, and then you start to find that we can make predictions about what kinds of text would follow other kinds of text based on having examined this vast corpus of text that's been produced over time by literally millions of people, and that's your large language model, and drawing on that helps us to generate new text, looking at these patterns of how that text has been used in the past. Now that has some limitations to it. Um, Namely that you basically are looking at everything, and it's not very focused. So you're getting a lot of potential noise in there from things that are not at all relevant to you, um, and that's going to give you maybe uh, some false leads. I mean, because there's a lot of words. I mean, language itself is a somewhat imprecise uh, medium, and so people use the same words in different ways and things like that. So you start getting some things that mislead you from that. You also have the problem that it's very expensive to go back and look at this vast corpus and update it. So each time they develop a new model, it's kind of frozen in time at the point that they had developed that model. So it's not very current.
Hmm.
Um, and So we don't have the ability then, just relying entirely on the model, to get answers to up-to-date uh, questions. So um, there are ways people are trying to get around this, and one approach is to supplement that model with a query of the live web, so you can maybe get the latest information uh, in addition to what has it, but you're still dealing a little bit there with the fact that you're looking at everything all at once, and you don't have a lot of precision to that. And I think that's one of the things that people are hesitant about with LLMs, is this feeling that the precision just isn't reliably there. And people talk a lot about hallucinations and things like that. And that's something people are going to need to overcome for LLMs to fully realize their potential. Now, I feel that metadata if it's used in a very specific way, has a lot of potential to get past these problems around precision when you're generating new content. And so,
Just a quick point there. With metadata, whenever I hear the word metadata, it brings me to the image of a library.
mm,
Uh, Library science was the origin of metadata, was it not?
it was one of the origins. Yeah, it was definitely one of the areas where uh, non-technical people encountered metadata first. So um, you can think about if you go to a library, you're trying to find an author, for example. The author is a particular type of metadata. The subject, you're looking for books on a certain subject. That's a piece of metadata. Maybe when it was published, that's another piece of metadata. So people are familiar with metadata through their experiences at libraries, most definitely.
Or
Um,
record stores, right? Record
Record
stores.
stores, yeah. I mean, if you're into music, I certainly am, and you can do. Our movies are another example of metadata. I mean, people, um, are interested in movies that are by a certain a certain director, or have a certain actor or actress in them, or things like that, or things that have been remade, so you sort of can watch the same story done multiple times. Those are all examples of metadata. Um, Now, that's all kind of very consumer-facing metadata. There's other kinds of metadata out there that um, describe enterprise data sets, looking at customer behavior, or looking at inventories, or all the things that we see when we're buying online. There's a lot of metadata behind the scenes there telling us, you know is that item in stock, or what colors are available. That's, again, metadata. It's just sort of a different kind of metadata.
And as you mentioned earlier, when you have metadata that is rich in context and describes all these different attributes of a thing, you can say, I want to buy white tennis shoes, and it can give you recommendations on different colors of the same model of the tennis shoe, or different sizes, or other models that may be white but aren't for tennis.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah.
what are other applications as it pertains to machine learning, as you mentioned earlier?
Um, yeah, I think that the personalization and recommendations is a big area. So, and we're finding this in all kinds of areas. So, um, a very common one is just personalizing content recommendations. If I'm looking at an online publication and I've read an article that I find interesting, it will give me some recommendations about articles that it also thinks that I might find interesting. And I mean, that's been around for a long time, but we haven't relied as much on the metadata to give those recommendations. It's often just been based on following who else has done things in the past. That it's more of a user matching rather than a content matching. So that's an example. If I'm looking for a product recommendation for a complex purchase that I'm making, if I'm trying to decide the right insurance policy for myself, or something like that, um, the metadata can really help to look at all these different dimensions that come into play, and maybe it can be used in conjunction with some questions that are being asked of me to help direct me into the right kind of choice. So I think that kind of thing, or investment advice, might be another example where metadata can help a lot in directing people to what will be a better choice for them.
Earlier on, before we started the podcast recording, we were discussing some concrete areas where there's a vast amount of information being produced and consumed and sort of interrelated
Mhm.
within large organizations. Namely, we talked about legal, insurance, publishing, and education. Shall we dive into the legal aspects and talk a little bit more about what that entails? What do we need metadata there, and how does it
Yeah,
benefit AI or generative AI in particular?
sure thing. So, um, legal is one of these examples of a field where there's a lot of content out there. Um, and it's very hard for people to navigate through it all because there's just so much out there, and you're not really sure what's going to be relevant to your specific question that you have. So
Mhm.
the question could be you as an individual, or even people in the legal profession have a difficult time navigating through all this. The cases out there, the regulatory rules, all these different um, kinds of the things that have been written about and interpreted and things like that. So um, people have been scared about the use of generative AI in the legal profession. And in fact, there have been, some well-known stories published there about how lawyers have just tried to jump on ChatGPT and ask a question and then gotten burned
Yeah.
for doing that, right? Because they um, they didn't get a very solid answer and they got caught out. But what we find though is if we use authoritative data, we don't just use that big vast LLM that ChatGPT is trained on, but if we actually can use some authoritative source to supplement the LLM. The LLM is there to provide us with the kind of the background knowledge and the general way that we can generate the text, but we need to anchor that in very specific concrete information. So if you have a very concrete source of information, an authoritative source, you can query that and use that and say, I need to know specifically about any kind of circuit court judgments relating to this. And that metadata there can tell us, all right, this is a circuit court judgment. It's not going to give me something from a lower court, or, not going to give me something from a court that was, outside the United States, or something that will be confusing information there. So I read that in the past month, one of the major publishers of legal information, which is Westlaw, it's a division of Thomson Reuters, is using this approach of they're using generative AI to answer very specific questions, because there are an infinite number of questions out there that people might ask, and then with their own content that they produced, which is defined with metadata, they're able to query that metadata and stitch together an answer that's going to be highly relevant and specific to the question asked. I think it's a perfect example of how this can be done. It's one of the really great examples I've seen so far of this being put into commercial implementation.
When I think of law, I think of two main branches, and I mean, this is based on lack of knowing, so it might sound a little silly. But one is contract negotiations, so making sure that you can set terms and reach an agreement.
Mhm.
You need to get a vast corpus of information around what is involved in that kind of corporate um, agreement,
Mhm.
because it deals with a lot of different cases, I imagine, depending on the kind of domain that you're in, and the scale of people, organization, resources that you're talking about. And I think of lawyers going to the courtroom and arguing with each other, representing two entities as well.
Mhm.
How I've seen movies where lawyers, they go to these big libraries and they say, "Print me this case and that case." You know, in this new age where we can retrieve um, facts and details straight out of the database,
Right.
straight out of the virtual copy.
Yeah.
Um, what does this mean for the practice of law?
Um, I'm not sure because I mean I'm not a lawyer myself, but I do think that one of the key needs for anyone using an LLM is going to be this referenceability, right? You need to be able and traceability. You need to be able to see where um, that information came from, and actually be able to go back to the sources for that. So what we're doing here is we're creating essentially a new kind of hyperlink that is the link is being framed by a generative description there that's giving us a short summary of what is behind
That's really
that
cool.
description there. And um, so, yeah, I mean, I don't think lawyers are yet going to want to quote the generated copy there, but it's a tool to augment their research, right? So, this is called augmented retrieval augmented generation is the name of this approach, and so it's helping people in the legal profession to find more quickly what's going to be relevant for them. It's not trying to replace their judgment or their thinking around something.
I've heard of that term and I read up on it, rag, but I think what you said was just hitting the nail on the head. It's like a hyperlink within the context of what you're looking for. So a contextual, a semantic hyperlink. And I'm
Mm.
very much excited with that new concept in my head that you gave me. Thank you very much for that.
Sure.
So rag and legal. You got
I
to make
believe.
sure that you're citing facts, right? You can't say the robot told me this, hence my client is free of any guilt, right? It has something that just amplifies what would otherwise be reading case files overnight or reading case files during your trial and making preparations, citing things manually.
Right.
It's
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's the thing is that there's just so much for people to go through, and I think that's an exciting area here is to um, realize that you might have thousands of documents and maybe 100 of them are relevant, and then um, those 100 documents, maybe 20 of them pretty much cover some of the same material, and then some of them are covering different things. And being able to really make sense of that and condense it, to give you at least a starting point, and then you can fan out and look at the detail as and when you need to.
Honestly, to me, this feels like the Industrial Revolution for information workers, for knowledge
Mm,
workers, because with the advent of the creation of a search engine that can help you query thousands of books at the tip of your fingers.
yeah,
Now we've taken that a step further. Not only can you query those books, but you can squeeze the knowledge, the specific context of what you're looking for inside of those books.
absolutely. And I think there's two real benefits. One is obviously saving the time. You're able to do things that are challenging even in the best of circumstances, and sometimes you just wouldn't have enough time to go through it all. But also, and I think your analogy of the industrial revolution is an apt one, in that there's some innovation happening here too. So we can start connecting things together in novel ways that we wouldn't have considered before. I mean, well, I'm not saying that the LLM is itself being creative, but it is making us aware of potentially related things that we may not have been previously aware of. And when we start seeing these previously unidentified connections, then novel insights can arise. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interesting developments. And I think that's even why, I mean, it's not anything I know about in any detail, but if you look at, uh, even people doing genetic research and stuff are looking at LLMs to as an opportunity to discover new things, because it's all just, gene sequences are just series of character text, and it can, the same sort of technology can apply to that as it can apply to, things written in natural language.
Earlier you mentioned insurance and claims and things like that. So what is the application in insurance? Because I know it's incredibly tedious.
Yeah,
You pay for it every month,
right.
and even when something happens, they don't always pay. So how can this enable a richer interaction within the company itself, so that
Yeah.
they have leaner operations, but
Mm,
also how they deal with customers? Because it should make it easy for customers to not have to rely on a human agent.
mm,
uh, it would I would imagine that if there's more metadata in the claims and everything to do with making a submission for getting compensation, the richness of that journey and the hands that touch it
mm.
should let you interact with that case file as a chatbot or as a virtual agent. No, or am I far off the mark there?
I mean, you're raising a really interesting scenario, and I haven't really thought that through entirely. But let's just imagine there's some kind of natural disaster that occurs, right? Someone, a town gets hit by a hurricane, and there's a lot of storm damage.
Mhm,
Um, Now, there could be a lot of complexity to the claims involved there. Someone has sort of a general purpose insurance policy that covers their different parts of their home, and maybe um, maybe some effects that are outside their home as well. And there might be damage to a number of things there. Now, it's going to be painful to try to read through your original policy, which let's be honest, a lot of us didn't really even do in any detail when we first signed that insurance policy. And we need to know, what's going to be relevant here. And so
mhm.
that's my question. I need to know, all right, this is my situation. I've been hit by a storm. I have damage on these items here. What's covered? To what extent are things covered? What do I need to do? All those sorts of things. That's the starting point. Well, I would expect that the insurer, they have a lot of documentation that impacts that question.
Mhm.
So they want to be able to pull together things that are going to be relevant from across these different documents. And so if they have these documents defined well with metadata, um, that query then can go to their source documentation and identify which parts are going to be relevant to that kind of query. Now, someone then in turn needs to look at the synthesized generative description based on what's been pulled there and see whether or not that uh, is accurate or not. And that's the part that I think we still need to define what would be the best way to do that. Now, if it's kind of if you need to put out sort of a general statement that's going to apply to many people, maybe you want to publish a sort of a condensed thing. If you have had this happen to you, these are the points that are going to be relevant to you. And someone can just editorially review that before they publish it, and it's going to happen fairly quickly. I think in the case of the chatbot you were just talking about, that may be a little more complicated because we just still need to control for the quality and make sure that there's nothing that slipped in there that shouldn't be in there. I do think that the quality is going to be better because we've relied on the authoritative source documentation. We have the metadata, but we still need to make sure that the wording is going to be legally sound.
I imagine that metadata paves the way for enabling self-service,
Mhm.
and that should vastly increase the quality of reaching agreements between two entities,
Yeah,
be you the customer and your insurance provider. Um, yeah, because right now it sucks. Let's
yeah,
be
it
honest.
does. It does. Yeah.
call, they say take pictures, wait 2 months or whatever. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
it's painful. Um, what other kinds of applications for RAG in this field of insurance do you see happening?
Um, well, I mean, I there's probably some opportunities on the medical insurance side as well. And that's obviously painful for everyone as well. So, I think as we're sort of physically trying to connect our patient information systems together and have them interface more with our claim systems and things like that. Um, there'll be some opportunities there to generate more specific informative messages. I mean, the problem I find with insurance claims is that they're written in a way that's not helpful to me. Either it's just kind of too technical, or it's kind of an empty statement. And I think generative AI maybe can help make the statements specific to me, but also in a language I can understand. So it can sort of take maybe some claims code that doesn't mean anything to me and translate it into words that would mean something to me.
That is one of the advantages of RAG, that you can contextualize a search and paint it or skin it in a nice way that is relevant to the end receiver, right? You
Yeah,
can sort of personalize the message to make it easier to understand
yeah,
or richer, so that you have a comprehensive understanding of all the details that have unfolded.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yeah. And I think one of the things that is really neat about LLMs and generative AI is that you can change the level of detail,
Mm.
um, and you can give someone a very very short, pointed response if that's all they need, or you can give them a more elaborate one if that's what they need. So that is very powerful.
Yeah, it sounds like it sounds like a really serious concept. I've seen YouTube videos where they have a series. They have an explanation. They have a this very complex physics subject that they want to explain. They want to explain black holes, and they
Mm.
have levels for kindergartners, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college grads, and then like PhD level. And if you could just have some mechanical interpreter, I
Mm.
mean, that'd be really useful for priming people in education or any sort of training scenario, especially if you have grades of knowledge that they have to climb.
I think your example there is really a good one, and I also feel that there's a lot of opportunity in the education sector for this approach to work as well, because it's a good example of the differences in audience expectations. I mean, we have people, by virtue of their age, they have different levels of understanding. They have different uh, verbal abilities. They'll understand words in different ways, and you can take some of the same basic source material and really change how it is being presented based on the audience. And I think education is a really good opportunity to do that.
I think that makes a good segue to talk more about education and RAG. And yeah, what do you think about that? There's grade levels, there are subject matters, and then as you climb the ladder in the American education system, or the education system at large in different countries, you have different topics that you can select as a student. So
Mm.
you can specialize in whatever branch of knowledge you want as an adult. Um, so where do we go from organizing those subjects and adding metadata and creating these kind of like uniform reservoirs of knowledge, and then how do we give that to developing minds?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, there's a lot of potential there. And one thing that comes out very clearly in everything you read about generative AI is that young people are using it. They're completely uninhibited using it, which is in one case is a really good thing that they're enthusiastic about new technologies. Um, on the other side, of course, though, they are somewhat uncritical users, so they may not be necessarily thinking about, is everything that they're getting
True.
appropriate
Yeah.
and factually accurate.
Mm.
So one of the real needs is to be able to take some vetted information, where it's been reviewed by educators and it's factually sound and there's no misinformation that's crept into this. We have this vetted information, and how do we take this vetted information and present it to people that really meets their needs? And so grade levels is definitely part of it. And we also have people want to get, uh, they learn in different ways. And so there's, some opportunities to maybe customize things in different ways if they want to have a more interactive way, or if they learn better through trying things out, or taking tests to start with to see what they don't know before just presenting them with things that they are required to memorize first. There are so many creative approaches that you can use, and there's been a lot of exciting innovation, I think, in education over the past decade or two, where you have the Khan Academy and things like that, and so many pretty good resources on YouTube. Um,
Mhm.
you know, you can repurpose a lot of this content and then be able to do other things where adapted to different audiences, different situations.
Different
Um,
languages.
yeah, yeah.
I, I I
Uh,
I think that was a powerful feature, and I've never considered that personalization of learning style. I mean, initially I wanted to slip it into the conversation. You get a virtual tutor, and there's no shut off time. Like you don't have to go to private school. You can go anywhere, and as long as you have access to the internet, you can ask all the mathematical homework related questions that you want at any time.
mm,
But the personalization of, do I want to consume this as a video? Do I want to consume this as an audio? Do I want to be asked questions so that I have to verbalize, or
right.
do I have to write and explain it
Mm.
in written language? I mean, there's so much that slips through the cracks because we don't have a holistic application of teaching of knowledge. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. And if you're a teacher, bless our teachers, right? I mean, they have a hard job to do, and um, and you have 30 students or however many students they have. It's really hard for them to give a lot of individual attention to each one of those students, and that may be 30 students in just 1 hour class. So, um, you think about how stretched they are, and so anything that we can offer to, again, augment, uh, I don't think this is going to entirely replace
no.
face-to-face teaching. I
Mhm.
wouldn't want it to, but um, helping people sort of discover things they're interested in, help them, coach them on things that they're having more difficulty with, giving them additional avenues into subject matter, things like that. All possibilities from generative AI, especially being able to refashion what's out there.
Hmm. And it provides another additional reinforcement via asynchronous feedback loop, right? You don't have to be in class to
Yeah.
ask questions. You don't have to, you. I would encourage kids to read books and write essays, but uh, they have unfiltered access to this enrichment to their developing minds. Um, but then they need guardrails to that as well, for
Yeah.
truth and so that they don't see subject matter that isn't really relevant to
Mhm.
their developing minds at an appropriate age level, right?
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think the key here is to have whatever is generated vetted by, a professional with expertise. Uh, and so, we can create lots more resources. It's getting easier to do that. And people can really focus on, ensuring that they meet the needs of people. But just take a quiz, for example. Creating a quiz is actually a fair amount of mental work to do. To think about what questions to ask, um, you know, potential answers that may be confused with one another, things like that. You can ask, Chat GPT or something similar to that to develop a quiz. I mean, that's perfectly within the scope of what it's able to do.
So
We
long
just
as
need
it's
to connect it to, some solid information to begin with that's been tagged well, so we know what it's about, to form the basic nucleus. Then that gets vetted by, an educator before it's delivered to students.
hmm. Now we're talking about education and amplifying the dissemination of information and personalizing it to the respective student or augmenting the capabilities of teachers to create quizzes or
Mhm.
teaching material, PowerPoints, etc. This is leading us to the production of content. And I've read articles. I myself have very what how my girlfriend likes to say antiquated views as to producing and synthesizing knowledge, reading and writing, reading and writing, reading and writing. But what's your take on that? Publishing and production of knowledge rooted in fact, rooted in some sort of coherent reality.
Well, I think I think publishing is going to be changing quite a lot, but it's going to be very important still. And what I mean is that we tend to think of generative AI as being a chatbot. And in fact, it can, of course, act like a chatbot. So the idea in the imagination of a lot of people was that, oh, I can just ask any question and get an answer. So why does anyone have to publish anything anymore? Um, well, the problem with that is that chatbots really only make sense if someone is asking something that's kind of novel that hasn't been asked before. Um, it's not a very effective approach if lots of people have the same questions and they all need to get the same answer. Um, and the reason is that right now LLMs, generative AI is still pretty expensive. It's expensive in terms of time. I mean, if you do a query, you're still kind of waiting for something to come back. I mean, we're used to, getting things just, loaded in our browser instantly, right? I don't want to be waiting for some answer to be churned out. But then it's also a cost thing. You think about the tokens that are required to generate the answer, the tokens being the sort of the fragments of words.
Mhm.
Each of those have a cost associated with them. Um, it gets to be very expensive to do this on scale, at scale. So we want to be able to leverage LLMs to create content that is going to be accessed widely. We all need to get some of the same news, some of the same information. about lots of things. And so I think that's really the opportunity.
And prior to this conversation being recorded, we were talking about how at this time, where a chat GPT or something that acts like that, it's better placed in the editorial process, but not as a replacement, not as an autonomous agent that gives you facts. It's only
Yeah.
meant to be viewed and kind of act as a stepping stone, not as a final copy.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And depending upon what it is you're publishing about, you may need to have several layers of review for any automated generated content. Now, if it's something that's pretty lightweight, if you're using it to um, generate some copy for a social media post, you just need to have a set of eyes on there to make sure that it doesn't say something embarrassing.
Come
Um,
to my birthday party, date, time,
yeah,
location.
yeah. But if you're using it for content that's relating to a regulated industry, for example, pharmaceuticals or something like that,
How
I,
to
I
perform heart surgery.
right, right. I mean, I still think it's possible to use. If you have this connected to a grounded source, and you specified what it is well, and um, you've made a very specific request, you can use that basis for content that you'll be published. But of course, you'll still need to have technical reviews, legal reviews, all those kinds of things. But um, we you can even chain together LLMs, where you have different LLMs in different roles. One's supporting the generation of content, one supporting the review of content. So LLMs may actually be useful in the review process as well as in the generation process.
Yeah, my brother-in-law, he tinkers a lot with LLMs, and what he did was he took a couple medical textbooks
Mhm,
describing pharmacology and the effect of this and that and the other out of curiosity, and he trained a local agent,
mhm,
and then he just asked the agent ask me questions that would help me describe the symptom or this disease,
mhm,
and then tell me based on the answers that I give you what kind of treatment you would recommend.
mhm.
And it's not to a level where it replaces a doctor,
Right,
but it's certainly a interesting exercise of where we are today, um, especially at the rate of evolution that these technologies are taking. Everybody's has their eyes on it. Everybody's taking the time to develop different applications of it and refine the retrieval of information.
right.
So
Yeah, I mean, in the case of medical, especially, it can again help give you a baseline for starting looking at something. Um, but I mean, where its limitations going to be is really is it's not going to replace the judgment of people, and the reason for that is not just because it's an important issue and you don't want to be trusting some black box to make a decision about an important issue. It's because we don't really know what it hasn't considered. If it's giving you some kind of prognosis, it's probably just relying on the things that are most commonly talked about in the corpus. And those are probably good starting points, but there are all these edge cases out there, and maybe something that's not talked about a lot is going to be relevant. And someone who has real experience and can apply that kind of judgment would see that. So again, it's just an augmenting tool, I think. But you know, with the right team, I think it could definitely help with revising things, maybe supplementing existing content that's been published to take it into account some new developments. So you could feed the LLM some some new research and ask it to maybe write a supplementary paragraph to incorporate that new research, and then have that reviewed by a person. I mean, that's a conceivable way it could work.
Michael, I've learned so much from you in this short amount of time. I want to tie it all back to metadata. That is your kingdom, your domain.
Yeah.
Okay, you're the expert on metadata. So we've talked about a lot, and these four different industries. We even brushed on medical. Where are we now? What do we need to do to get to the next step, and where can we go?
Yeah. Um, well, I think the interesting thing about metadata is that it's it's been around a while. There have been some really interesting advances in standards relating to metadata. I think the folks who work on the knowledge graph side of AI, in particular, have done a lot of great work with defining metadata standards. Um, but we haven't really seen the full implementation of metadata in how organizations work with their content and their information. So um, I think there's a big opportunity for organizations to get a lot more precise with how they manage all this. I mean, there's huge volumes of of content that they're producing and other sources of information. And what organizations are struggling with is how to knit this stuff together. They want to connect it. They have multiple systems managing this stuff. They have APIs that try to make these different systems connect together, but they don't have a common language. And the metadata provides that language that helps you connect these different pieces together. So uh, what I would say is that anyone who's interested in this needs to engage with someone like me to help them understand where are the opportunities to better define what these things are about, and so that they're able to be connected together. And that's kind of been one of my missions in my work is helping organizations with that task.
People are more focused on becoming accountants or financiers or operators, project managers, engineers. But where's the connective tissue that binds them all together? It's language, it's knowledge, it's metadata. So, great. Yeah, no, I had a lovely time. Are there any imparting words of wisdom to a journeyman in this space, or people that are adopting metadata to enhance their RAG, their retrieval of augmented generation?
Yeah, I think metadata is a fascinating field. I've written a couple of books about metadata. You can find them on Amazon if you're interested. There are probably 800 pages of material between the two books. So that's a really good place to get started if you want to go deep into the topic.
Excellent. Well, it's been lovely having you, and yeah, we'll check you out. We'll check you out on Amazon.
All right. Thank you, Joaquin.